Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, January 29th, 2020. Time for yet another show, and it's, Wednesday, our opening arguments in the impeachment trial of President Trump, if you believe that's what he is, are finished. And now we move on to the mystery round of proceedings here. Not entirely certain what comes next. We have to wait and see, of course. We have to hold some votes. We're holding open the possibility that we won't know whether Republicans will hold together by one vote or two or three or all four of the margin that they have by way of difference between their block of votes and the votes controlled by Democrats. We'll see how many Republican senators are embarrassed by the situation that they've been put in and are looking for an out, but that number has to fall below 4. So it's a question for the management skills of Mitch McConnell. How does he find ways of allotting the 3 passes, if 3 are necessary, among perhaps several Republicans who find themselves too embarrassed to continue to vote to sustain the sham? Or do we give credence to the reports over the past couple of days that a larger number are ready to vote differently than they originally planned on the question of whether or not to allow witnesses, and now are in a corner and can't get out without voting at least to hear from some witnesses? We'll see. Perhaps there are too many people who have been embarrassed by the proceedings to this point. And we don't know. We'll have to go and find out what eventually ends up being true. And of course, there are various ways to structure deals and votes such that enough people are comfortable, even if there are more than 4 Republican senators who are uncomfortable saying no to all witnesses. They may be convinced to, if they're going to hold out and look like they're bucking leadership and demand that witnesses be brought forth, they may be very willing to say, I need for my state, in my reelection effort in particular, to vote yes on witnesses. But that doesn't mean I will tell you who I'm going to vote yes on when we start to vote on individual witnesses. We must hear from witnesses. Now, the passes might have to be handed out on the question of whether or not to, say, call John Bolton, but not so much on the question of whether to call Hunter Biden. Now, of course, we're considering calling Hunter Biden because this isn't a real trial and there aren't real rules, and you don't have to actually justify yourself to the judge before you subpoena a witness and explain why that witness is actually relevant to the proceedings. You just go ahead and do it. And if the judge actually steps in and says, no, that's stupid, you say, no, you're stupid, and overrule him. So you can do that here, and it doesn't really matter that there's no material reason to have a certain witness. So anyway, you can get your pass and say, go back to your state and say, I voted for witnesses. I even voted to bring Bolton, but I was overruled. And once we were open to witnesses, I thought, well, we might as well hear from Hunter Biden too. There's a number of things that Hunter Biden should have to answer for, like, I don't know, Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump's nepotism. If it wasn't for Hunter Biden, they all wouldn't be able to do this. So let's call in Hunter Biden and make him answer for all nepotism, past, present, and future. Why not, right? It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to get a majority of the votes. So, okay, we're ready to roll. Let's see. Oh, Bill tells us from Portland, Maine, he gives us our marching orders this morning. Not really, of course, but a good suggestion. And let's see. He says, Daily Kos Radio is live now, and Kagro X, me, David Waldman, starts to openly wonder if President Trump isn't really hiring the very best people. An alert neighbor calls the proper authorities, and I'm hauled off to Gitmo, which is at least a little bit warmer than it is here today. Although I understand there was a fairly significant earthquake yesterday, I think during the afternoon hours, news broke of an offshore-centered earthquake, and I haven't heard of any serious impacts just yet, but I think in between Jamaica and Cuba, an undersea earthquake, a fairly significant one, it was 7.7 on the Richter scale, which, Trump, of course, he's saying he only wants to know about tens and all of this stuff, but and then didn't affect our country, so who cares? And even if it did, also maybe who cares? Take some magic marker and draw it out of the country. But I was wondering whether there was any major damage done onshore, or whether, you have an offshore earthquake, you worry about tsunami, but I guess no, I don't know. Maybe that's just not prone to it in the Caribbean basin. Or I was just consumed with the impeachment news, which is not hard to have happen to you if you're wrapped up in these things. In fact, let's dive into it now. Greg Dworkin is here, and we're ready to do it, and I can look in the background and see what happened about that earthquake anyway. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. Well, it happened in Miami and not Duval, so therefore it really wasn't our country, right?
Yes, I guess so, right.
But there was a tsunami warning.
Was there? Okay, that makes sense.
And it was a 7.7 earthquake, and so Jamaica got hit by some of this as well. Mm-hmm. Anyway, lot going on here. This is one of those fascinating process things where I think it's highly appropriate the way you presented it and opened it up in terms of what's going on with Mitch McConnell and the Senate.
Okay. Well, good, because I did.
Because after all, it's a complete manipulation of the rules based on who has the gavel. This is exactly what's going on now. Let me just set the stage for you.
Okay.
By reading some of the headlines that came out last night. This is the Washington Post. McConnell says he currently lacks the votes to block witnesses. We'll add context to that. AP said GOP lacks the votes to block witnesses.
Maybe.
Time, GOP struggles to marshal the votes to block trial witnesses. No, it's all about blocking witnesses, so at least the reports make that clear. Republicans scramble to corral votes to block witnesses, says the New York Times. So the thing of it is, McConnell did tell his group. It's a caucus in the Senate.
They like to say conference,
but they still call it.
I think they're
a
conference in the Senate. I'm not positive of that, but I'll check it. I think that's a Republican thing. I'm not sure.
Definitely in the House, but I thought they were a caucus. But
maybe.
Whatever they are,
let's find out.
He told his group of senators he didn't quite have the votes, and you're right. I think that a lot of this is portioning out, given that Collins and Romney get passes. Who gets the third pass? But there's also truth to the idea, which Angus King floated, that it could be 5-10, because nobody wants to be number 4. So if they're going to be witnesses, you're not going to see 4 votes. You're going to see more than 4 votes. And if they're not going to be witnesses, you'll see 3.
Yeah.
So that's really the dynamic, and everybody who's reporting on it says, Mitch probably has the votes, but you know what? It's fluid. What does that mean? It means they're bracing for information to come out between now and Friday, which is when they want to shut it down. Mm-hmm. Today is the day where they get to play, Jeopardy. Questions for 400, please. And what use that will be, I don't know. Whether there's going to be the same sort of session tomorrow depends upon how today's goes. And then the vote on witnesses would be planned for Friday. That's at least how they have it scheduled in their head. And that would get everything done in time for the Super Bowl and the Iowa caucuses. But whether, in fact, that plays out kind of depends upon whether you're looking at this as the replay of the Kavanaugh situation, where it was a kabuki preordained thing, or whether you're looking at it as the Affordable Care Act vote with McCain, where it was a preordained thing that got thrown off because somebody decided they didn't want to go along.
Okay.
They're senators, and they get to play senator sometimes. So that's hard to know. Lamar Alexander, for example, could be a wild card. We know that the Tom Tillises and the Cory Gardners and the so-called vulnerable senators, being vulnerable just makes you hug the GOP and Trump more because they're terrified.
Yes.
Of losing the base because they know everybody else hates them, and they may wind up losing anyway. So don't count on McSally or Tillis or Gardner. They're gone. What we're talking about are the odd people that you don't usually hear from because they're usually quiet about what they think. The Jerry Morans the Lamar Alexanders, who's been something of a focus, but there are some institutionalists who see beyond just this particular vote, who happen also to be friends and allies of John Bolton. And we know that from people like John Kelly speaking up and said, I believe Bolton. Things like that come out really put pressure, and it is real pressure, it isn't just kabuki, on the Republican senators to do the right thing. Of course, my guess in the end is that McConnell gets the votes, because that's usually what happens when you have the gavel. You make other side deals and promises and this and that, and we already know. There's a repeat story in Ross story, for example, that Trump's lawyers are giving thousands of dollars in campaign contributions to people like Ted Cruz. So whether that's true or not, that story, stuff like that happens all the time. And it's one of the ways you sweeten, I want you on this vote. And that's arm twisting of a normal capacity in the Senate. That's not unusual. Whether it's corrupt or not is a different issue. It's just business as usual. And so, in the end, I think McConnell gets his votes, but it'll be close. Yeah. And so, just highlighting the fact that that's what's going on for 2 days really doesn't help the Republicans.
Well, that's I'm glad that it does not. I guess you mentioned something that gives me a clue as to what to guess if you have to predict something. I'm thinking, as we mentioned yesterday, some commentators, and as you just mentioned today, are thinking that what might be happening here is what happened a little bit with the Kavanaugh situation, that there was this moment of fluidity, and the story was either broke or was planted that there was a problem with the votes and they didn't have all the votes, and there was going to be some kind of demand, and some Republican mavericks were going to demand something additional.
But that did happen.
And it did happen.
Jeff Flake forced a so-called delay for a sham hearing.
Right, and that's the big
investigation.
That's the problem. Is you engineer something where you say, well, you get somebody who's stuck, and they just say, I just can't go ahead without making it look like I'm putting up a stink. And McConnell says, well, would you accept the stink being this? Let's have you buck the leadership and shock the world, and you'll get all the headlines that you demanded an investigation. But then the investigation will be bull. And but you won't care, and it will clear him, and it's total BS, but you'll have gotten your investigation, and you'll throw your hands up and say, I got my investigation, and it cleared him.
And then somebody else in the caucus says, yeah, I like that idea. I'm in with that.
And then
so
they do
now you
that.
have more than one person saying, yeah, do that.
So
of course, he's the one that has to do it publicly.
Yes.
But then I'll say, good.
Right. So it works out for everybody. And so the best clue that I've found so far that's what they'll do is that Republicans like Mitch McConnell have spent the last couple of days prior to this current situation about who's got the votes, accusing Democrats of running the same Kavanaugh playbook that they did during his hearings. And they're just doing again what they did with Kavanaugh. That tells us, the Republicans are doing what they did with Kavanaugh. That's how I know, because they said that Democrats were doing it. Democrats are not. Republicans must be, because that's what they do. They accuse the other side of what they're doing. And so the best clue so far that that's the outcome we're looking at is that they have said that is the outcome Democrats will force on us.
Right. So, that's how it is set up, and that's probably how it goes. Of course, Murkowski voted against Kavanaugh. But another person who claimed that that's exactly what she wanted and helped free up her vote was, of course, Susan Collins. Yeah. And that's why in the pundit roundup today, I was reading a back and forth between Gail Collins, different Collins, and bedbug columnist, whatever his name is, Brett Stevens.
Yes, right.
which I thought was rather amusing. It's called Always Look on the Bright Side of Impeachment, not to mention the Democratic presidential race. It can be done if you put your mind to it. You got to be optimistic about these things. But Gail Collins says, look, I have to admit the Bolton revelation, which, as you point out, is a big moment but not a surprise, perked me up. But one of the many downsides of the Senate trial is the amount of time people are having to spend contemplating the heart and mind of Susan Collins. And that's true. You get tired of that after a while.
Yes.
But you know what? She's up for re-election. And so let her make her case and then go to the voters. Dave Rothkopf, writing in USA Today, says, even if the Senate doesn't remove Donald Trump, this impeachment is far from a mistake. The judgment of the court of public opinion will matter more to history in the 2020 elections than the verdict in the Senate impeachment trial. I would most emphatically suggest, he writes, that undertaking the impeachment investigation was far from a mistake, even with the deck stacked against the just outcome by a GOP leadership that's lost sight of the most basic ideals associated with public service. Much good has come out of this process and might come out of it even in the event of an acquittal. The mere pursuit of the facts by the House has underscored the importance of accountability and has in a very systematic and public way revealed the facts of the case. Trump, McConnell, and the army of parrots spouting White House talking points may repeatedly say otherwise. But the president's wrongdoing has been made crystal clear, and many of those detailing or corroborating it have been witnesses who are above reproach, objective, and distinguished. Many of them are Trump appointees or apolitical career public servants, and today, poll after poll reveals that a substantial majority of Americans believe the president is guilty of wrongdoing, and about half believe he should be removed from office. That's even true in Fox polls, and the Q poll from yesterday shows 75% of the public wants witnesses. So, they're winning the argument with the public, which is the most important thing. The second most important thing is to make the Senate do what they don't want to do, which is not going to happen because that's not how it works. So as long as you have the votes, the outcome is preordained. But you can pay a price for that. And people like Tillis and Cory Gardner and Martha McSally may wind up seeing their careers disappear. They may get past the, I'm afraid you're going to primary me phase of their reelection, but then they have to face the actual voters, and things may not go so well for them there. Yeah. We see how that primary stuff can roil the GOP just down in Georgia. They have an appointed Georgia Congress critter sitting in the Senate seat. Yes. I guess that was Johnny Isaacsen's seat, right?
Yes.
And so now Doug Collins has announced yesterday that he is going to primary that person.
Kelly Loeffler is her name.
She's
been there
for 10 minutes. Nobody knows who she is, but she all of a sudden decided to be super Trumpy and start dumping on Mitt Romney, her very good friend, who really is a very good friend of hers, or at least was until yesterday.
It's fun being in the Senate.
Right. So what happens? The National Republican Senatorial Committee, the NRSC, put out a blistering Collins sucks. And how can he do this? He's only doing this for his own ambition, which is weird because Collins would probably win that primary.
Yeah. I don't know if I hope he does or not.
Right. So, I mean, but the point is,
I guess so.
The GOP is just terrified of people like Doug Collins primarying them.
Yeah.
And so you can't get them to move. You can't get a Tom Tillis to move. You can't get a Martha McSally to move. Primary season is still with us. The deadlines haven't passed yet. So the one bad thing about timing for this particular impeachment is that because of that, you will not be able to move Republicans. And that's, just as relevant for thinking about whether or not they're going to vote on witnesses as it is about thinking whether or not they're going to vote on acquittal.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Man, all right.
So that's how it's, in other words, it's an entirely uphill battle. Really. What I'm amazed at is that the Democrats have done this well, given that all the odds are stacked against them. And that was true in the Kavanaugh situation as well. When you don't have the votes, but you force it into the public eye and embarrass them.
Yes.
Because they're obviously doing this for corrupt reasons, which is what's going on with this trial. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best play you can make. You don't have the votes.
You play a bad hand, and you play it as well as you possibly can.
And I think that it has borne out the strategy, and certainly in hindsight, any doubters about the question of whether or not to transmit the articles of impeachment immediately has played out well. I mean, everybody had to know that there was more evidence coming. I mean, that's just the way it is with this administration. And,
right. The only question is going to be more evidence between now and Friday, but it's the basic strategy. So Manu Raju interviews Senate Majority Whip John Thune.
Huh. Okay. How exciting.
Thune says, the Senate shouldn't hear from Bolton arguing it could create, quote, an endless cycle, end quote, when facts are out there.
Oh, no.
I love it. I mean, you pin these guys and make them say out loud, we'll get to Joni Ernst. Yeah. I don't think that anything he's going to say changes the fact. I think people kind of know what the fact pattern is. Mm-hmm. He's right. I mean, Trump is guilty and did everything we said he did. And that's why they have to move to, but it doesn't matter, which is why some of them are coalescing around Dershowitz. By the way, one more thing about the vote on witnesses. The problem for the Republicans is that they are not a united body on this, no matter what they say. If McConnell had all the votes completely lined up, he would have just said so.
Yes, I guess so.
But that's not what's going on. The problem is there's different coalitions. And the coalition, and Rand Paul, I think, alluded to this, or if it wasn't Rand Paul, it was one of the other ones. The group that may want Bolton to testify is not the same as the group that wants Hunter Biden to testify.
Oh, no. Yeah, right. So
you can put this up for a vote and have the embarrassing result of yes, Bolton, no, Hunter Biden.
You could.
And that's not what they want. So that's why they don't want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, likewise, you could also find out that there really are 10 senators who are for having witnesses. 3 of them are for having John Bolton, and 7 of them are for having Hunter Biden. And you vote yes on witnesses, and then you end up voting no on calling Bolton and yes on calling Biden.
Okay, that's fine. Do that, and that will look even worse than it's looking for them right now. So Alana Abramson, who is a Capitol Hill reporter, McConnell told senators they don't have the votes to block witnesses. That was because it was along the lines of persuading them why they should vote against allowing them. Mm-hmm. Another source said point of the meeting was to lay out why the GOP should not vote for witnesses, and concludes in trying to summarize what's going on with this witness thing, says basically nobody knows anything.
Oh, well, including the people who are voting on whether or not to have witnesses.
Right. Rick Wilson this morning said, my theory is McConnell has the votes, but barely. The reason he's majority leader is because over the last 10 years, he's got a long march of electing people who aren't Yahoo types, and it worked. His majority's at risk, and that's all he cares about. But the other problem for them is Hunter on the stand, Rick Wilson says, is also a great opportunity for the House managers to start talking about Jared, nepotism, Barbie, Don Jr., and Eric the Slow. Unintended consequences, how do they work? So that's another reason why they don't necessarily want Hunter Biden. And he's basically making the case that's a complete bluff.
Well, okay. I wouldn't be upset if that were the case. And it will be real interesting. You know, it would be. I'd love to see it kind of in that sense, and then have them talk about the Trump nepotism, and then have Republicans objecting that this was totally irrelevant to the issue at hand, which is this other irrelevant
you have
issue.
The vote, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Right. Well, they'll do it. We'll see. I don't know. I guess we'll wait a little while and find out. But I do hold out the possibility that McConnell does have the votes, but says, I wonder if there's any advantage to saying I don't for some reason. But I'm not positive what it would be. But okay. Well, at any rate, he can. I think he benefits from some ambiguity for a while.
Well, you know, at the very least, he's asked everybody to hold off till Friday. So, you know, we have another couple of days of this. And again, you don't know what information is going to come out. But in the meantime, the unfortunate part for him is that some of his members go to the microphone and they open their mouths.
Yes.
Like Joni Ernst did when she basically came out and said, the whole reason we're doing this is because the Benghazi investigations are hurting Hillary.
Yeah, essentially.
Oh, sorry. What I meant was it was hurting Joe Biden.
Yeah, I did catch those comments. That was part of the very, very testy exchange between the second string Republican senators and the press after, I guess, Tuesday night or no, I'm sorry, it must have been Monday night's session.
Yeah, it was yesterday morning, even though it seems like a lifetime away. So yes. That was Langford and Ernst. And Ernst had this smirk on her face when she said it. So immediately Biden did the smart thing from a politics point of view and is using it in both fundraising and in his pitch to Iowans. Mm-hmm. So he's in a town meeting and he says, I understand this Republican Party better than anybody, Joe Biden says. Did anyone see what your Senator Joni Ernst said yesterday? She spilled the beans. Pretty subtle, huh? Biden said. You Iowa caucus goers have a chance for a twofer. You can ruin Donald Trump's night by caucusing for me, and you can ruin Joni Ernst's night, which is a clever thing to say.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he wins the caucuses.
Yes, it does.
But interesting comment that Dave Wasserman made yesterday when the Quinnipiac poll came out. Kristen Soltis Anderson, a Republican pollster, had observed that the Biden-Bernie age gap in the Democratic Party continues to be absolutely wild. Per the Q poll, Biden wins 5 times as many senior Democrats as Sanders, and Sanders has 17 times more with the 18 under 35s, 18 to 35s.
Yeah.
Right? And Wasserman says Biden at 3% with the 18 to 34, but still in the lead overall is something to behold. And he adds, it's setting up a dynamic similar to 2016. Biden could easily plot his way to the nomination thanks to older voters, but appear to have much less enthusiastic support than Sanders because older voters don't go to rallies.
True.
Fueling distrust and conspiracies on the left. We have all the enthusiasm. He doesn't. Yeah, but he has the votes and the delegates. Yeah, but it's rigged.
Yeah, well, people are excited about enthusiasm. And then there's the turnout problem, too. I mean, traditionally, I'll say this. It's a tradition to say that the young people don't turn out. I don't know whether that's really true.
Because, for one thing, if you wait long enough and keep saying that, they're not young people anymore.
That's true, too. I wonder if they're particularly susceptible to manipulation in a caucus setting. Like if you texted out wrong information about where to go for your caucus, would that disproportionately?
And which day, right?
Yeah, right. So if you want to do your voter suppression,
I hope to see you next Thursday.
Exactly, but it's on. I
this
texted
location,
it to everybody.
And
it's
you print in the home of somebody you don't like.
Yeah.
All show up there because we're waiting for you.
Yeah.
And don't worry, there'll be food.
Oh yeah, well that's important too. Although seniors love food as well.
Well, you didn't tell the guy who lives there that there'll be food, so they're going to be mad.
Oh yeah, well they'll blame him. So who cares, right?
Right.
Okay.
Anyway, so I don't know, but the fact of the matter is nobody really knows what's going to happen with the Iowa caucuses. Bernie looks like he's doing quite well, but it's complicated, and so nobody really knows.
Yeah, I guess so. Although, as I recall last time around, his troops really tended to favor the caucus setting because they were really good at organizing for it, and they were getting much better results out of caucuses than primaries. So
yeah, but now you have complicated things like what if Amy Klobuchar doesn't have viability? Where do her votes go?
What? Yes, right. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Network Radio. Let's continue on with our tour through the news. I did, however, look up the aftermath of the earthquake. I guess there's some video. You saw a video, Greg, of flooding?
Of water. It could have been Jamaica. I'm not sure where.
I'll have to check up on it, but we'll see if the video can tell us. But at least not a major tsunami impact like you've seen, for instance,
like in
Asia.
Indonesia, where it really hits hard. No, I just saw some cars, get picked up by the incoming water and get tossed around like toys.
Okay. Well, I'm glad for we would have been flooded by the bad news and the horrific video had it come down to that. I'm fairly sure. So I think in this case, perhaps less news is relatively good news.
So on the break, I was talking to David about other things that are under the radar in Iowa that are kind of semi-interesting, like this story in the Washington Post, which reads, "The nuns," that's N-U-N-S, not N-O-N-E-S, "the nuns who could help Biden win Iowa. The Biden family's been wooing the sisters in Dubuque with cookies and ice cream. Will they turn out for him?" And David and I were doing our best not to make jokes about they're in the habit of voting or habitual voters, and we couldn't. I mean, it was impossible.
Yes, so we did during the break. But then now we've done it.
We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know whether they'll turn out. Canvassing is different than caucusing. Caucusing is different than primary voting. And we just don't know. So there's a lot to watch for. I expect Bernie to do well. I expect him to do well in New Hampshire the following week. That's what everything says. That in and of itself won't win the primary. It's all about the delegates. And, of course, I think that maybe the more interesting question is just to see what happens with Warren and what happens with Buttigieg. And do they lose enough support so that it changes the dynamic and make it, let's say, a Biden-Bernie race? Or do they stay in it and still make things, as we like to say in the business, fluid? It's a fluid situation.
Right. True. We'll see how this goes in the delegate-wise. Certainly, there's just not really very many at stake in the opening rounds, and then there's an immediate, gigantic, super-duper Tuesday that should pretty much settle things. I would
Well,
guess,
see,
in terms
part
of
of the problem, and again, we talk about impeachment as a reason to, for example, pull some of the senators who are running off the trail and stick them in D.C. for a week, and whether or not that changes the dynamic of what happens in a place like Iowa. But maybe more to the point, impeachment sucks up all the headlines.
Yeah.
And so do you have the same kind of media bounce after an Iowa win, particularly when you're splitting it three ways in terms of how you decide who won? Is it the delegate count? Is it the number of votes? They're going to announce three different things. The delegate count is supposed to be the thing. But between having a complicated way to explain who won and impeachment dominating the headlines, it's going to be difficult to get the usual Iowa bounce going into New Hampshire. And a lot of times New Hampshire ignores what happens in Iowa anyway. So, it's very difficult to predict. And so people who say they know what's going to happen are lying to you.
Yes.
Or they're not lying. They think they know, and they're just wrong.
Right, but we can't get into their mindset.
Well, some people are just lying.
Oh. Well, we don't vote. But something. And therefore, I don't have the votes. So there's your answer. They're lying, but I don't know. Vote thing, Hunter Biden.
Now, there's a thing that I wanted to cover just because I always am looking at the journalists and seeing what they're doing, and I think it's just a fascinating comment on today's Times. And this is about Felicia Sonmez. And
well, today's Post.
Felicia Sonmez is a Washington Post reporter. And this article comes from Columbia Journalism Review. It's entitled Felicia Sonmez and the Tyranny of the Social Media Policy. And this kind of summarizes what happens. Amid the wave of public eulogizing that followed the death of Kobe Bryant, many people on Twitter stressed that we should also remember the time he was credibly accused of raping a hotel worker in Colorado.
Yes.
Now, Bryant denied the claim, but later settled with the woman and said he understood how she feels that she did not consent to the encounter. That's a quote. How she feels that she did not consent to the encounter. He understood that. One such tweeter was Felicia Sonmez, a politics reporter at the Washington Post. Sonmez had consistently been vocal on issues of sexual assault. In 2018, she alleged that she had been abused by John Kamen, who then worked for the LA Times. Another woman made a similar claim. Kamen, who subsequently lost his job, has strongly denied wrongdoing. On Sunday, Sonmez first linked to a Daily Beast story, which she didn't write, about the Bryant rape case without adding commentary of her own. She elaborated, but only after receiving a rash of abusive messages, including, she said, death threats. Any public figures worth remembering in their totality, she wrote, that folks are responding with rage and threats toward me speaks volumes about the pressure people come under to stay silent in these cases. She also shared a screenshot of one nasty message she had received without masking the sender's name. Now, managers at the Post were not happy with Sonmez. According to Rachel Abrams of the New York Times, Marty Barron, the paper's top editor, emailed Sonmez with a screenshot of her first Bryant tweet along with the message, Felicia, a real lack of judgment to tweet this. Please stop. You're hurting this institution by doing this. And I'll point out, it wasn't the one where she showed somebody's name in an email to her. It was that she showed a story about the Bryant rape that was written by another publication.
Well,
so
you can't do that.
Please stop. You're hurting this institution by doing this. Tracy Grant, managing editor at the Post, then told Sonmez to delete the tweets before suspending her on the grounds that she had strayed beyond her, quote, coverage area and, quote, undermined, unquote, her colleagues' work. Responding to the threat Sonmez had faced, Grant added she might want to consider a hotel or a friend's place for the evening. At least one of the threats referenced Sonmez's home address. Sonmez had contacted Grant to flag the threats as mandated by the Post security protocol. This, many critics noted, felt like a dereliction of the paper's duty to ensure the safety of its staff. And now, gets worse after that. Many such critics could be found inside the Post newsroom. The paper's Guild wrote an open letter to Barron and Grant accusing them of failing to protect Sonmetz and noting that this isn't the first time management, quote, has sought to control how Felicia speaks on matters of sexual violence. As of last night, nearly 350 staffers had signed that letter. Opinion writers about the paper used their platform to come to Sonmetz's defense too. Eric Wemple, who's their media critic, wrote that the backlash against it was rooted in the ancient wisdom that urges folks not to speak ill of the dead, which is a fine rule for everybody except historians and journalists.
Yes, right.
Right? Yesterday, David Von Trail, who's conservative, concurred with Wemper. Sonmetz, he wrote, had been punished for keeping both eyes on the truth, or more precisely, on one particular truth, namely that somewhere a woman was experiencing this outpouring of adulation for a man who choked and lacerated her during an encounter that she called a rape and which he acknowledged was very much like one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Late yesterday, the Post retreated. In a statement, it said that following a review, it had concluded Sonmetz's tweets were ill-timed but not in clear and direct violation of our social media policy. She was reinstated.
Which is
no apology. In a statement of her own, Sonmetz hit back, insisting she and her colleagues deserved to hear directly from Marty Barron, and noting that the episode had sown confusion about the Post values. Mm-hmm. As some observers have noted, the Sonmetz fiasco is a fresh reminder that newsrooms still struggle when coordinated mobs of online culture warriors target their staff. Barron and Grant clearly feared institutional blowback, though it's possible they found Sonmetz tweets distasteful on their own terms. The Post isn't alone. Last year, the Times caused a mini-media panic when it reported that a loose network of conservative operatives had compiled dossiers incriminating hundreds of reporters at leading outlets, which, by the way, never came to anything. The loose network has since been mysteriously quiet. And for some reason, A.G. Sulzberger, the Times publisher, deemed this development worthy of public comment. He called it a clear attempt to harass his reporters, which was correct, but then added, the paper would nonetheless be diligent in responding to legitimate problems raised by anybody, even those acting in bad faith. This handed the harassers a victory, at least to some small extent. And Sonmetzgate also exposes a more routine problem, the tyranny of the newsroom social media policy. Ostensibly, such policies are meant to safeguard journalists and their bosses against the pitfalls of the internet. In practice, they often read like ham-fisted attempts to reconcile competing impulses. The reporter should communicate in more personal, informal ways, but also prioritize preserving the paper's reputation. Such wording invites flawed, not to mention inconsistent application. So
yes.
You can't share opinions, but
not if you're not an
if you
opinion
think a fact you are. Lots of people have been on the internet with opinions. I say that all the time from journalists, myself, personally.
Sure.
Right? But if you retweet a fact, you get censured.
Yes, I guess. I mean,
it's bizarre. Again, CJR writes, the Post isn't alone. Tensions like these exist across the media industry. We warn aspiring journalists that they won't be hired unless they have thousands of Twitter followers. But we also warn them that they won't be hired if they ever express an opinion online.
Yeah.
Regrettably, CJR points out, Twitter followers tend to like opinions.
Yes, that's what.
So you can't get a lot of Twitter followers if you don't have opinions.
That is true.
And the Trump era has made things worse. And there's things that reporters shouldn't do, campaign for candidates, lie, display prejudice. But they're so obvious and so intrinsic that you don't need to tell anybody that. Yeah. So what are the policies for? It's hard to avoid the conclusion they're a tool of management control. I think it's a great piece because I think that's right.
Yes.
So basically, they want you to go in there and get readers for us and be yourself, but don't say anything.
Right. Just say what we say, but make it popular.
Yeah, or repeat your stories or tweet links because that's how you get viewers. We certainly want that. But why should people trust you if you never reveal anything of yourself and you claim and pretend to be a robot when, in fact, everybody knows that's not true?
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem. Well, I mean, we know, and Jay Rosen has said this for years, the Church of the Savvy says nobody should have an opinion, the opinion from nowhere. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows that's not true. So when you try to present yourself as such, we know you're taking sides. You take sides by what you print and what you don't print.
Yeah.
Right? When you did Clinton Cash at the New York Times, that was taking sides.
True. Yeah. The conclusion that social media policies are a tool of management control, I think, is pretty clear. It's pretty obvious. And you didn't really even need this episode to figure out that anything that management produces is a tool of management. So, but this makes it glaringly obvious. And, also the Post is going to suffer from the same problem as any brand tweeting online. The only ones that get any attention, the only ones that people follow are the ones who do, wacky, anomalous things like tweet about their overwhelming depression as sunny delight or whatever. Otherwise, no one follows them. They're of no interest unless they do something anomalous or show some personality. And,
so basically, that's how it works.
Yes.
Now, one of the other stories, of course, that we're following, and I think we should have a little follow-up, of course, is this coronavirus thing.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm glad we covered it the other day. But there's a really nice piece here by Ed Yong, Y-O-N-G, who is a science reporter and writes at The Atlantic. And he's got a nice, simple explanation, a good piece on what the R0, what looks like R0, right. Off-sided R0 number tells us about the new outbreak and what it doesn't.
Okay.
Because that's what you're going to see reported. Oh my gosh, it has an R0 of 2.5. What does that mean?
Right.
When a new disease emerges, health organizations turn to a seemingly simple number to gauge whether the outbreak will spread. It's called the basic reproduction number, R0. And though useful for decision makers, and when you see it, it's a capital R and a 0 next to it, R0. In brief, R0 is the average number of people who will catch the disease from a single infected person in a population that's never seen the disease before. If it's 3, then on average, every case will create 3 new cases. But even though it seems straightforward, it's hard to calculate and tricky to interpret. It's important because if it's greater than 1, the infection will probably keep spreading. And if it's less than 1, then it won't.
Okay.
Right? So we're dealing with something that's about 2.5. And part of the problem is all the groups are looking at it using different methods to figure it. The results have been mostly consistent with estimates hovering between 2 and 3. WHO, who does not like to be called WHO, was a little more conservative than the others with estimates of 1.4 to 2.5. And one Chinese team said it was between 3.3 and 5.5. And a British-led group said 3.8, but now it's down to 2.5. So 2.5 is about the consensus right now.
Okay, so 3.8 from the British judge.
In the intervening time, some observers seized on the 3.8 number, with one Harvard doctor describing it as thermonuclear pandemic level bad.
Oh, well, all right. If it's going to lead to that sort of reaction, I can see why it's important to get it right.
That's a dubious interpretation, and here are 6 reasons why. First, the R0 estimates for the new coronavirus are in line for those from many other diseases. SARS was in the same range. HIV is in the same range. And it's considerably lower, as I said the other day, for measles. Measles is 12, maybe as high as 16. So measles is really spreadable. This is probably a little bit more than seasonal flu.
Okay.
But not much. Second, a bigger R0 doesn't necessarily mean worse. Oh. Seasonal flu has an R0 that hovers around 1.3, but it infects millions. SARS has an R.0 of 2 to 5 and infected just 8,000 people. So the number's a potential transmissibility number, but it doesn't actually tell you how many cases are going to be in the end.
Okay.
Now, the fact that SARS was 2 to 5 meant you had to take precautions. And since it was mostly at the time a nosocomial illness, that is to say, it was health personnel who were getting sick. That meant that health personnel had to wear the moon suits and the big masks and the stuff that you see out of the movie Contagion, and that sort of thing. So it tells the health personnel what to do, but it doesn't really predict the future. It's like a poll, Polls tell you what's going on, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what's going to happen next. It's not a fixed thing. So people make the mistake of thinking that a high R0 means you're inevitably going to end up with a pandemic, and that's not what it means at all. On the other hand, we are seeing it in a lot of different countries, so people are right to be cautious. And also, R0 is an average. This mentions something we mentioned the other day as well. Let's say the virus has an R0 of 2. This could mean every single infected person passes the viruses to 2 other people, but it also could mean that one infected person is the super spreader that did 100 and 49 others didn't infect anybody. And those 2 scenarios have radically different implications for what's going to happen.
That's true.
Right? Super spreader events are dangerous for healthcare workers, but counterintuitively, that could be a good sign because it means everybody else is okay.
Yes. So you can't sit in a room and say it's got an R naught of 2.3 and there are already 3 additional sick people in here, so I'm fine.
Yeah,
I'll
well,
just
0.3
breathe in
meal
some
gets
terms.
sick.
Yeah. Well, all right. I'll get a slightly elevated view.
Average family is, 2.1 kids, and that 0.1 is always the run to the family. It doesn't work that way. So also, R naught is not easy to calculate. And also, it's not some magical, immutable property. The virus mutates, and so it changes.
Yes,
and
true.
R naught is not destiny, just like polls. It's a measure of a disease potential. And once nations realize a new disease exists, they can actively screen for it, take steps. They can completely isolate millions of people in a city and not let anybody in or out.
Yeah, that was in the
which
movie.
is what they're doing in Wuhan. And none of it should be a cause for complacency. It's a serious threat, this thing. But the way people and news outlets have interpreted what they mean, that can be problematic. So you got to be careful about reporting on it and what it means. But the fact of the matter is, it does seem to be spreading. It's potentially bad, and potential is the word. And so anytime somebody talks about it and somebody else says, well, everybody always panics over this. Well, that guy who said it was thermonuclear bad pandemic numbers panicked, but nobody else did. And it's perfectly appropriate to be cautious and concerned about this. And the question is what you do about it. Now, we have an administration that isn't known for logic and cool heads.
Right, true.
The CDC is pretty good still, even under Trump. It was under Bush. But they're talking about things like, well, maybe we should stop all plane travel to China.
Mm.
Okay, well, what effect does that have on the economy? Because when Toronto announced restrictions and concerns, the Canadian economy went into recession.
Yes.
So how do you balance that with being properly concerned? And if the incubation period is as long as 7 to 10 days, what good does it do to screen on the plane? You can get the people who are sick, but not the ones who aren't sick. There are a couple of cases, including one in Germany, of asymptomatic people spreading disease, but that may or may not be correct, and it may or may not be common. So there's so much we don't know. It's really hard to know exactly what steps to take. So it's not Ebola. It's not the flu either. And flu's bad enough. But it's not just a common cold. So that's your coronavirus report for today.
So don't do anything.
Wash your hands.
Oh, right.
It's good for you. And keep your hands away from your face.
Sure. Why not? And I wouldn't go to Wuhan right now.
Not a good idea.
Other than that, I guess continue as normal, wash your hands, and don't cough on anybody.
Right.
Okay, not too bad. I don't know what the Trump administration does with that. I can't decide whether they would be thermonuclear panic or whether they would say, some people have headaches.
No, they'd simply vote to have no witnesses, and then you can't talk about it.
Right. No one can tell what happened here. Not because we don't know what happened, but you're just not allowed to talk about it. Certainly can't tweet about it. Okay. Well, that's a good clarification, and it's not a phenomenon we're unfamiliar with. People getting
really
half
not very
of the
different than what I said on Monday, but Ed Young says it so well. I just thought it was worth going over what he said.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about it in terms of like occasionally reporters get some of the information, understand some part of it, and report inaccurately.
Well, that's a good point, and that's why you really need to know who are the good reporters that you need to pay attention to. Julie Rovner, Maggie Fox, the best of them all, Helen Branswell. Believe everything she tells you. Those are the folks that you should really follow. There are some who are a little bit more agitated about it than others. Ed Young's a great one, the one that we were reading from.
Okay.
But stick to those folks, and you won't go wrong.
Okay. All right. Good advice there. It does happen, and we'll see those things in politics all the time where you would say, for instance, that everyone knows that to get anything done in the Senate takes an R0 value of 60 so that it spreads. Well, not exactly true, but I understand why you came up with that.
Right. And in this case, we're talking about 51. Yeah. So that's the news for today, and it's Wednesday. That means we'll be back tomorrow.
Right.
And we'll do it again. We'll see what happens. We'll see how the question and answer Jeopardy session goes today.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that's used. I hope people have been coordinating their questioning and
I
have
hope
a
so.
real
Now,
theory
as I understand it, the questions will be aimed either at the House managers or the Republican defense team.
Yes.
Like, I don't think you get to ask John Bolton or Rudy Giuliani questions.
No. Yeah, and we'll see whether they allow sort of role-playing questions. If you were a tree that was John
If you were
Bolton,
John Bolton, what would you say?
Yeah, right, exactly.
I know what you're saying now in terms of the presidential defense, but if you were John Bolton, what part of the book would you be reading from here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's some place where you might see some creativity, and you might actually see the Chief Justice start to perk up at some of that and say, I don't know if that's a good question.
I'm wondering about the mechanics. I have this picture of Chief Justice John Roberts in his robes, sitting in the august Senate chamber, picking up one of these like fortune cookie pieces of paper, bursting out loud, laughing, and saying, "I can't do this one," and then going on to the next one.
Yeah, right. And I'm curious about the mechanics of it.
Order!
Yeah. Or you could fool them, and say, okay, we have a question here from Senator Ben Dover, who asks, he said it, I can't believe it.
Haywood. And, also we got Vinny from the Bronx, who's a first-time, long-time.
Yeah, right.
The first time he's ever asked the question in the Senate, but he wants to know. He always tunes in and sees what's going on.
Do they say who the question is from? Right. I'm curious about all that.
The FAN sports show. I think it would be far more interesting and would actually get some ratings.
Yeah. That would make it interesting. And, we don't see this all that often. And I don't recall the mechanics of the Clinton impeachment enough to compare, and how did that go, and did they have the question?
Justice Roberts saying, well, this question is from Senator Mike Braun. Who is Mike Braun? Is he actually a senator? Can anybody vouch for this guy?
Great, another fake, guys. Thanks a lot. No, seriously, that's me.
No, seriously.
Yeah, all right. Go ahead, please. It will be very interesting. I don't know whether they identified the senator who asked the question. I assume so. I think they would say, Senator so-and-so directs a question to the defense team, and I imagine that, depending on the senator, there will be smarter, dumber, more pointed questions. And I don't know what obligation the questioned parties are under to answer the question substantively. And I think, reading some of the historical records, there have been times where the addressed party has simply declined to answer the question. They're not on trial, so they can do that, I guess. So it's a weird format all around.
Right.
And we'll see who goes too far with it.
This is Chuck from New York, first time, long time, and I really have a question that it's more than of a statement than a question. If you've ever been to an academic conference, it's more of a statement than a question, but I'd like to make it anyway.
Yeah, and I imagine that's exactly how they'll do things.
And let's the statement is to talk about my own work.
Yeah, well, that's pretty common if you've ever been to a Chuck Schumer event, or really any senatorial event. We'll see how it's structured, and I imagine, there'll be mini speeches with a question mark at the end.
Right, or Chuck from not really the Bronx, but it sounds better if I say that.
Yeah. So what time? Do you know what time they begin with that today?
I have no idea.
Figure that out, but probably
it's gotten a lot less interesting since the first couple of days, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's been tough to listen lately. So, okay, well, we'll be on the lookout for that, and we'll all be curious to see how can they sustain 16 hours of questions, or I guess the real question for me is, how soon does it break down into, all right, this is just ridiculous, nobody has any questions? Or,
in other words, the way I would ask it, when does it stop? Make it stop.
It's a good question from the independent senator.
Yeah, I don't want necessarily this part. Maybe they'll prove me wrong, but I don't see what you really gain out of this. I think the important thing is to move the question on witnesses. Let's see where we're at, and let's go.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it could be used to refine certain points, but I don't know that there's much that you can do from the Republican side except say, why aren't we hearing from Hunter Biden? Democrats could possibly say things like, well, would you like to correct the record about whether or not Republican members were in fact allowed in the hearings in the SCIF, because they were. So
Well,
you
yeah.
wouldn't
I
want to
mean,
lie,
would you like to fix the part where you were lying? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, and
You can
then
do
they
that.
can say, no, I would not like to fix that because I wasn't lying. You lying
Yeah.
liar. Oh, all
Okay.
right.
Next question.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't expect any revelations. There won't be any Perry Mason questions that make them break down and cry and say, you're right, the president is guilty. Nor will there be any questions that make Democrats say, we never should have come here in the first place. So, but it'll be, I guess, interesting to see what they try to do with it. And again, I think the most interesting thing is how long does it go before people say, this is stupid? I mean, before they say it. We're already there. But,
Yeah, we're already there, but we shall see. Anyway, that's
Great.
the summary for today. Lots of interesting stuff. I think this is all hurting them, the GOP, in November, and I think it'll continue to do so. And, of course, the other part is everybody knows more information is going to come out. So how stupid do they want to look?
Very stupid.
It's really going to be that could be one of the questions, too.
Yeah.
Given that more information is going to come
How
out,
stupid is
this book is going to be published quite soon. How stupid do you guys want to look?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. I don't have to answer that.
Yeah, all right. Well, we're going to let they'll push one
We're
the
going to
youngest
request
member
a break,
out.
so we
You
don't have to
answer.
deal with that question. And that's
Okay.
what we have coming up right now.
All right, great. Well, we'll see you tomorrow, and we'll have some answers about how the questions went. That's weird, but I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Greg. See you tomorrow. Welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. And let's see. Oh, man. We've got lots to catch up on, of course, and many other directions in which we might decide to travel. I happen to notice this story flashing before my eyes, let's say. The Hill reporting that a government watchdog group, I'm sure, not an actual dog, seeks records on NPR reporter's removal from Pompeo trip. You may recall, of course, that Pompeo grew testy, and everyone... we were still up during that break, Scott tells us. That's interesting. That's all right. We kept it clean. That's interesting. So we'll check in with Justice and see what may or may not have happened during that. And I did mute the microphone after Greg left for some of the more violent throat clearing, so I did save you that. But, why don't we just ignore that from now on? How about that? Not you, Scott. I'm glad to actually know that that's the case. But, I mean, from this point on in the show, I could just stop talking about that and cover the news instead. I get distracted very easily, as you can see. Who is this government watchdog? And who is this Pompeo Grutesti? And we know who Pompeo is, of course. But I guess continuing fallout from his fight with the NPR reporters, the NPR reporter Mary Louise Kelly, which has now become a generalized fight with all NPR reporters because he has Donald Trump disease, which has a very high R0 value among Republicans, as we've figured out by now. Here's the story. A government watchdog group on Tuesday asked the State Department to turn over records related to the removal of an NPR reporter from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's upcoming overseas trip, a move that was widely seen as retaliatory following Pompeo's clash with another reporter from the outlet. It's a very Trumpy thing to do. The Washington organization, its crew, of course, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, is seeking emails, text messages, and other records related to the department's decision to bar NPR reporter Michelle Kellerman, it's Kelemen, from a group of journalists traveling this week with Pompeo to Europe and Central Asia. I don't know if crew has, before this, made a habit, for instance, of seeking the same information when the president bans members of the press for similar reasons. Although I think that maybe when he has done that in the past, people have sort of been stunned by the absurdity of it and like, how did we even get here? And now that it's become a regular practice and they figure, well, I was stunned for the first 5 minutes and so I didn't file my, and now the music break is playing, eh? Okay, that's what Scott tells me. So we have our timing off a little bit, but I'm pretty sure I think I have the time right. But I guess we'll coordinate with Justice about that one. I don't know what would have caused the timing to change unless somehow the clock on his computer got changed. But ordinarily, that stuff is hard programmed to happen at a certain point, and our computers are all relatively synchronized these days in keeping the time. All right, well, we'll figure out what that's about. If you missed anything, I am reading, or if you're missing it now, I don't know what to tell you. The podcast will be fine. But Crew, I had wondered whether they were asking questions about various bands. And I think eventually when it became clear that Trump was going to make a habit of banning reporters from outlets that he didn't like. I mean, I remember that he went through this with some of the traditional mainstream press at some point. And I'm going to ban the Washington Post, and I'm going to ban the New York Times. And he had to kind of double back on it. And it was a soft ban, as it was anyway, because we all know that as much as he bashes the Times, he loves being in the Times. And that's why he loves talking to Maggie Haberman so much. And so anyway, but I'm just curious about now Crew seems to be on top of everything, and they've had a streak of very successful lawsuits in this vein, seeking information. And I think they've kind of hit upon a formula here that's been very successful for them. And they're not the only ones doing it. There have been a number of organizations who have had great success saying every time the administration or the president himself does something absurd and out of the ordinary and unpresidential and really, I guess in some cases, well, certainly violating norms and regular practices, if not being outright unconstitutional, they're very quick off the mark and just simply say, I'm going to file a lawsuit demanding Freedom of Information Act release of all emails from that department that relate to that decision. And let's get to the bottom of it, because I have a feeling they're very stupid people. I have a feeling that the first batch of emails will reveal exactly what you would imagine is behind this decision. That there's an email somewhere from an aide to Pompeo that says the secretary wants all the NPR reporters pulled because he's really pissed about what happened with that other NPR reporter, and he blames them all for it now. So we're very sensitive about NPR, so no more NPR. And like, well, duh. Why would you write that down? That's a very stupid thing to do. This should all be done with a wink and a nod. Don't you know how Washington works? So, but they're successful in catching them. And I wonder, though, whether the operators that Crew typically has their eyes on now sort of say, you know what, don't worry about finding complicated ways of communicating these things. Let's get the job done. Let's ban the NPR reporters and have no doubts about it, because Crew finds out, but what happens to us? Nothing. So just say what you mean and ban the reporters. And everybody goes, oh, I can't believe it, they banned the reporters. But the reporters are banned for a while, and then we put them back in there. But our point is made, and our point is, well, is our point being made if NPR gets back in? Right. No, but that's not our point. Our point is we can do whatever the F we want, and we haven't been wrong about that yet. I mean, the courts eventually tell us that we can't do it, but we already did it. So are we wrong? No, and there's a weird genius in that, by which I mean stupidity. Anyway, let's see. Crew is seeking emails, text messages, and other records related to the department's decision to ban NPR reporter Michelle Kellerman from a group of journalists traveling this week with Pompeo to Europe and Central Asia, where he's going to go do some crimes, I guess. Journalist advocacy groups have decried the State Department's action, saying the removal of Kellerman from the press pool appeared to be a response to the flare-up between Pompeo and her NPR colleague Mary Louise Kelly during a tense interview, as we say, during which Pompeo grew testy. The requested records would shed light on whether the State Department or Secretary Pompeo did in fact retaliate against NPR as a result of the contentious January 24th, 2020 interview. Crew attorney Nikhil Seuss, I'm guessing, not Seuss like Dr. Seuss, but S-U-S, Seuss, it might be sus, but it might be just, well, anyway. Nikhil, I apologize if I'm mangling both your names, but at any rate, this is the Crew attorney writing in the group's FOIA request. The public has a compelling interest in the release of such records, insofar as they could reveal efforts to undermine the free press. by excluding a major media outlet for improper or arbitrary reasons. Sus added. We'll say sus instead. I apologize for not knowing how to pronounce that. Pompeo, of course, well, you know the story. Lashed out at Kelly. During the Friday broadcast, Kelly said she had told the truth about what actually happened, and now they're going back and forth about all this stuff. There was the unmarked map. There's the F-bomb. Anything else? Oh, yes, right. Since then, President Trump has praised Pompeo for his handling of the dispute, which I'm sure only emboldened him, and may even have led to and this is what would be really interesting. Why the reason you request these emails is not because you can undo the damage, though you may be able to get them to reverse the ban on NPR, perhaps even in time for the trip. Who knows? But what you might discover in there is that there'll be an email somewhere that says, the president really loved what you did to NPR. Let's take it out on them because, I don't know, we hate the free press. They might just say something quite as dumb as that. If he's out there saying, you did a good job beating up that reporter, you never know what might come up in the email. People love to forward that stuff. So, all right, good call by them. We'll keep an eye on that one. Let's see. Other things that have been tucked away in Pocket and elsewhere, commented on this morning on Twitter. I got to keep an eye on my current Twitter feed to see if, so far, no complaints about how things are going. So that's good. We can keep on going with our regular trajectory here. Let's see. That's true. That's an interesting thing here. Let's see. I'm going to round up what I had tucked away in Pocket. There is, of course, some additional news on the Bolton book and what's happening among Republicans. The Washington Post reporters Karen DeYoung and Josh Dawsey reporting 2 days ago, I guess Monday evening, Bolton book Royals Washington as one-time allies turn on Trump's former national security advisor. So it's interesting just to watch the dynamics of the Republican players and all this. Greg had mentioned that there were some Republican senators who considered themselves allies of Bolton in all of this. But I'm not certain how many of them among the Republican Senate conference. I did look that up. They do say conference even in the Senate side. Whereas, I mean, I think the person he mentioned was John Kelly, who's not, of course, a senator. So we don't know how much difference it makes. I'm kind of curious about members of the Senate clinging to Trump, people who were Bolton allies who might now say, I'm jumping ship, I'm going with Trump on this one. And that's been really interesting watching Republican commentators from the outside, too, saying things like, I can't believe there's any contest in the question of whether you should believe John Bolton or whether you should believe Donald Trump. But, you know, it takes a Republican to say that because that's like a nonsensical statement to most Democrats. Although I think most Democrats would come down on the side of saying, well, if you have to pick one, like, are you going to shoot me if I don't answer? And the question is, who's more trustworthy with a statement? Whose statements would you choose to believe if you had to choose one? As between Bolton and Trump, I think pretty much certainly any Democrat says, well, Bolton, I guess, but then they vomit. That's the problem. And that's worth noting because there are reporters out there from the Church of the Savvy. I mean, we're talking about high priests, I guess, of the Church of the Savvy, which is weird also because sometimes they seem like they're so on the ball, some of these people. But in the last couple of days, of course, there's been comments like, well, I can't believe liberals are making a hero out of John Bolton. And it's like, are you not seeing the vomit when we say these things? John Bolton is loathsome. But Donald Trump is, one, more loathsome, and two, on trial at the moment. And so, yeah, you bring in witnesses who you might say, and of course, lots of people say, I hate John Bolton because of his policy positions. But part of me I also hate John Bolton because of how open and honest he sometimes is about what his policy positions are. He doesn't feel any need. The reason people hate John Bolton, for the most part, is because he's never bothered to hide his contempt for things that liberals often value, or never bothered to hide his interest in, his prurient interest in promoting and starting wars around the world, and that bothers some people. And so I guess, you could say, well, he has this. He has a reputation as a truth teller for liars. That is, I am not ashamed of telling people that I am unabashedly in favor of going to war with Iran, even if the evidence is false. Okay. But he also, of course, has the reputation of carrying water for false allegations when they tend to support his advocacy for war. So it's not that he has a reputation as a truth teller. I'm sure there are some Republicans who believe that to be the case. Not very many Democrats, if any. And to the extent that they are glad to hear from John Bolton, it's just in terms of, a knife fight between two loathsome jackasses. Terrific. Fantastic. A root for injuries. You might have a favorite in that fight, but all right. Well, at any rate, I think we're getting off the topic of A, of this piece, and B, though I'm glad we discussed it this way, because I'm not 100% certain in scanning through that we get away with learning all that much by reading through this piece. I just kind of wanted to note it for the record because we had earlier discussed that there were allies of Bolton in the Senate, and I'm not certain how well that is going to hold up. I think they are going to be abandoning him pretty quickly. Let's see. Other comments and pieces that I had tucked away in Pocket that I didn't get to over the last couple of days. Let's see. First of all, we had... we already had this one. This was... we did discuss this yesterday. It should be out of here, so excuse me here while we archive that, and I do that live and on the air. I had some interesting comments from some of our usual sources, Brian Beutler, Marcy Wheeler, pointing out during the opening arguments phase, for instance, that with the fallout from the Bolton book, they focused things very effectively, I thought. Empty Wheel, Marcy saying, understand why this is important. And she's speaking here of Maggie Haberman's tweet from Monday saying, per sources, some GOP senators privately pushing White House for information on who at the administration had visibility into the manuscript, Bolton's manuscript, over the last month. Senators feel blindsided. And lots of discussion among our friends about how ridiculous it is that they would claim to have been blindsided or feel blindsided, particularly, when everybody kind of knew where everybody stood on all of this stuff. And, we all know that the Republicans also know that the president is guilty of these things. They just don't want to vote to say so and want to pretend they don't care. But anyway, Marcy saying about Haberman's observation that senators feel like they were caught by surprise by the Bolton manuscript, and maybe they were, but the issue was, look, you've had the Bolton manuscript. We didn't talk about the mechanics of this, right? John Bolton goes to write a book, and as is the case with most people in or out, recently out of government, who would be writing a memoir that would touch on issues that could potentially impact national security. They have to submit their manuscript to various departments for screening. They go through it and say, well, all right, you can't say this in there. That's still classified information. That's, would give away some methods and what do they say? I can't remember what their terminology is that includes the words methods off the top of my head. But anyway, they can go through and say, this can't be in there, this can't be in there, or you can do it this way but make that anonymous quote or what have you. But at any rate, that's a long process. he submitted the manuscript some time ago, the White House would be one of the organizations that was given the manuscript. I understand the manuscript, as it now stands, has been cleared for publication, which gives rise, that's important information, of course, for when, for instance, Republicans start saying, well, let's not call Bolton as a witness, but why don't we all read the book, but let's read it in a secure facility because there could be confidential or classified information involved. Well, no, there isn't any classified information in the manuscript anymore because it's been cleared for publication. So that's the actual open and shut case on whether or not it needs to be read in a secure facility. I suppose they could say, well, we want to read it in a secure facility because we understand that Bolton has a proprietary interest in keeping the juiciest bits secret, and so do we. It's a different interest. We want him to make his money on his book, but I would think by now they want to take that away from him. So anyway, the point is there's no reason to treat the manuscript as classified information. Certainly not as classified information. You could treat it as confidential information if you feel like recognizing Bolton's proprietary interest in saving the good stuff for publication date so that people will buy the thing. I think they just want free stuff. They want to read the book, but they don't want to pay for it. Well, what's really happening, of course, is they're looking for an excuse not to call Bolton as a witness because they don't want to call any witnesses. Anyway, as Empty Wheel was pointing out about Maggie Haberman's reporting, understand why this is important. Republican senators, and even in the House, have staked their careers on a defense story that the White House encouraged or even handed them, one might say. Now they look like they were part of the cover-up, which they were. They were betting, though, that Trump had nailed all this down better. And so a lot of Republicans who stood out there and said, including his defense team, and then, of course, the defenders of the defense team among rank-and-file Republicans in the House and Senate, both, and elsewhere, have said, well, as you heard the defense team say, there are no witnesses who say that they ever heard the president acknowledge a quid pro quo in the Ukraine deal, or any of the two deals that would qualify as quid pro quo situations. Trying to figure out how to deal with that Latin phrasing. And of course, that's a twofold problem. There are witnesses, and you keep voting not to hear from them, but also the new layer added by the Bolton book, which is that now everybody knows that there was a witness. I mean, they should have known that there were witnesses before, but they were being suppressed. But somehow that didn't quite crack through the same way as this did. And maybe because it was attached to a book, maybe because people know who John Bolton is, but didn't really know who Gordon Sondland was. That could be it. But the part of the American voting population that's paying attention at all to this has seen Republicans say, well, there's no witnesses that say the president denies there was a quid pro quo. Other people say there probably was one, or they heard second or third hand that there was one. Of course, that whole thing depends on, well, we've read the transcript, and Trump insists that there was no quid pro quo, but his insistence is based on his understanding of what that means, which is that I didn't say the words quid pro quo, and so therefore there wasn't one, whereas the rest of us know, that's ridiculous. You can't just blurt out the term and say, well, I didn't say the term. I mean, by that measure, there were no nouns or verbs or adjectives in the conversation either. And we all know that there were, but I never said noun, verb, or adjective. You can't pin this on me. No, but you used them. Don't you understand what this means? No, of course not. He doesn't do that sort of higher thinking. And neither do his fans, so they just repeat what he said. If you listen to the C-SPAN callers, again, you'll vomit again. So, take precautions. But you'll hear that all the time. They'll say there's no witnesses. There was no quid pro quo. The president said there was no quid pro quo. So, but I guess the Empty Wheel's point here, all the Republicans were instructed, remember this was coordinated overtly with the White House. Mitch McConnell said so. So dozens, hundreds, I guess, technically, of Republicans got these instructions. If you're going to talk to anybody, the press or otherwise, about what's going on in impeachment, or you find yourselves cornered and you have to answer, then you should tell people, well, there are no witnesses that say they heard the president make a quid pro quo or offer a quid pro quo or acknowledge a quid pro quo. So that's that. And then the bombshell drops that John Bolton says, I heard the president describe a quid pro quo and say that the aid was contingent on getting these investigations announced by the Ukrainian government. So I am a witness. There are no witnesses. Well, now there is one. John Bolton is one. And Republicans are pissed because they're like, I don't know, why did you tell us to tell everybody that there were no witnesses when you had, well, one, you know that there was one because you were there, Mr. President. You know that John Bolton heard you say that. And further, if you forgot that or are just flat dumb and didn't understand what quid pro quo meant or whatever, somebody somewhere read this damn manuscript. They should have said, well, the thing is, that's the position we'd like to stick to, but there's going to be some nuance to it. You got to understand that in a few weeks, eventually we're going to have to let go of this thing. We can't hold the publication of it. John Bolton is going to say he was a witness. Now, here's what you do when that comes. But they didn't do that part. They didn't prepare anybody for what to say when the John Bolton thing comes. And I don't know whether it was they thought the trial would be over. I don't know whether they thought they could keep it under wraps. But now, of course, the people are speculating that the White House is the one who leaked this information, and that I still haven't figured out why they would do that. I really don't. It's like they want to get caught. Maybe it's one of those things. I'm not really sure. But yeah, this is bothering a lot of Republicans that the White House has done a terrible job coordinating all this. Brian Beutler commenting on the same thing. And in fact, the same comment from Maggie Haberman prompts him to say, when Mitch McConnell worked hand in glove with Trump's team to rig the trial for him, he, McConnell, I guess, forgot to ask them what exactly they were covering up and how many people knew. He forgot that as far as Trump is concerned, everyone is cannon fodder. And so, yeah, he didn't really think about this. It did. I guess somebody didn't consider, is the president so contemptuous of everyone in the world but himself, that he's asking that by giving us these talking points, he knows he's going to eventually undermine us, and he doesn't care. And it's, you know what? It's difficult not to believe that that's the case if you also believe that the White House is the source of the leak about what's in the Bolton manuscript. And I mean, I don't know who else to point to. I mean, well, I do. My initial thought was, well, of course, Bolton would have leaked this, and his publisher might even help to leak this. Now, they categorically deny it. And there's no real reason to say, well, that's the end of that. It must be the White House, because they could be lying too. And I guess my initial reaction was, well, you know, they could be lying, but I don't know what their motivation to lie here is. Yeah, I do. They don't want to be tarred with taking down the president if they don't have to be. So why not deny it? And, you know, if it ends up getting hung on them, well, okay, I did it. So what? So I don't know. I guess they do have reason to lie, and I don't know what the penalty is. I don't think they're in a situation where they're under any penalty for lying about whether or not they leaked that. So maybe they did. I mean, it's still the one that makes the most sense. However, if for whatever reason you take their word for it and you conclude that it must have been the White House that leaked it, that's an interesting dynamic all by itself. It's almost as if Trump was, in fact, quite consistent in his feelings about Mitch McConnell. Because my recollection, of course, is when he was running as a candidate there, and then a few months into his presidency, there was really no love lost between the two of them, and Trump campaigned hard for himself against Washington leadership and against McConnell and Paul Ryan, and he was terribly harsh on all of them. When he needs them to be close to him, he's effusive in his praise, and when he wants to get rid of them, he says that they suck. So I guess it's possible that during all this, he's just really has retained the feeling that I hate Mitch McConnell and Washington Republicans in general. Wouldn't it be fun? I mean, I don't know if he thinks this far out. Well, wouldn't it be fun to force them all to just categorically deny the quid pro quo, as I have been doing, and then release this information and watch them all squirm? It doesn't matter to me because I lie about anything and everything. Those guys supposedly tell the truth occasionally. No one actually believes it, but that's their reputation that they want. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just taking a moment out to respond to something I just saw on Twitter. This will make you all very happy. Peter Baker of the New York Times, one of Armando's favorites, I think. Peter Baker, not really, tweeting, what has he got? Has he got a new story attached to it? Yeah, Time story for John Bolton, an upside-down world after Trump revelation. This actually bears on something we were talking about earlier. The quote here he includes is, "It's a totally upside-down world. Democrats who once called him nutty and reckless now want to call Bolton their star witness. And his erstwhile allies on the right are calling him, quote, a tool for the radical Dems and the deep state." That certainly is upside down and backwards. But it occurred to me, and I thought I had to blurt this one out, that I would like to see, Peter, some of the, you have some attributed quotes that actually say the words star witness. I mean, I don't mean to be too pedantic about things, having just had this conversation about the words quid pro quo. But I in this case, I think the words matter because I have seen lots of people say things like star witness about Bolton and others. And I have seen it take root among the reporters, despite the fact that Democrats afterwards point out, no, you keep saying that this is the Democrats' star witness. These were Republican witnesses. I mean, people like Gordon Sondland, for instance, testified in the House, and it ended up inuring to the benefit of Democrats, I guess you could say, in the sense that if you were someone who believes, for instance, that this is a Democratic impeachment as opposed to the House of Representatives voted to impeach you. And yeah, Democrats happen to control the House of Representatives, but the House is acting as a constitutional body here. But it inured to the benefit of the forces in the House that believed impeachment was warranted. But Sondland was not brought as a Democratic witness. This is a major point of contention this morning. Trump tweeting this morning again, Republicans never got to call any witnesses. The House called lots of witnesses and they called only Democrats, and it was one-sided and we didn't get a chance and no due process. No Democrats testified. They were either nonpartisan civil servants or Republicans or Republican appointees of this administration. And Democrats said, sure, we'll hear from them. And as it happens, we're happy to hear from them because they're going to tell the truth despite the fact that they're in the employ of this president. And so great. Or, maybe they didn't even know that that was going to be the case. But the testimony turned out to bolster the case for impeachment. And I don't know if Republicans, in some cases, those were witnesses that Republicans in the House hearings said, yeah, you got to call these guys. This is our suggestion. Call these people. And it didn't work out very well for them. And I'm not sure whether they knew that was going to be the case or what. And in other cases, I guess, maybe they didn't suggest them, but maybe Democratic members of the committee said, well, this is an important person who would be in a position to know, so we're going to call them. Or they've said they know, so we're going to call them. And the Republican response to all of this has been, for instance, when they have disagreements with the witnesses or think that there are problems that undermine the credibility of a witness, Republicans say, oh, this is the Democrat's star witness. This is the Democrat's star witness. Someone should put together, what do they call it? A supercut video of Republicans saying this is or that was or not. Democrat star witness, Democrat star witness, Democrat star witness. And it occurs to me that I don't believe I have seen a single, actual Democrat, elected Democrat or otherwise, who speaks as a Democrat, ever say star witness about anybody for any reason. And I would like to know, for that reason, for Peter Baker to, maybe he didn't write this article. I guess I should open up and take a look at it. To say, the Democrat star witness, the Democrat star witness. This is a Republican talking point, and it would be bad form for a New York, regular form, yes, but bad form for a New York Times reporter to uncritically repeat this idea that there is a Democratic star witness, that Democrats have called anybody a star witness, that they would call Bolton a star witness. Maybe they have, and it would be a bad idea and poor protocol, but I have the feeling that they have not. And maybe Peter should take note of the fact that hey, you know what? That's a good point. Only Republicans have used the phrase star witness. Why is it in my piece? It's there because they planted it in my head, and I should acknowledge that happened. It may not carry great guilt. It might not change anything. It's not a game changer by itself necessarily, but once in a while you would hope if they would evaluate things fairly, they would say, yeah, as a objective reporter, it's bad for me to find myself parroting phrases this way, and I should check for that in the future. Let me go and read this thing. But by the way, before I do, I'll also note that Mike Musson helped me out with some behind-the-scenes production help, reminding me that the phrase I was looking for was sources and methods. That's right. And I had it in my head. I know it's S and methods. And, of course, I was thinking back to, school days. It was scope and methods when we had a class. Scope and methods of political science. It's not scope, but sources. That's right. That's the phrasing. All right, well, let's go take a look at this thing here. And think about whether we want to add to that tweet thread about this stuff. For John Bolton, an upside-down world after Trump revelation. Democrats who once derided him now want him to testify at the president's impeachment trial, while some of his erstwhile Republican friends are throwing him to the curb. That's the subheader. Let's see if there's discussion of star witness in here. It is a Peter Baker piece. Starts out this way. Not long ago, they called him too extreme, aggressively and dangerously wrong, and downright dangerous. They called him nutty, reckless, and far outside the mainstream. Now they would like to call him their star witness. Says who? As Michael Cohen said, but he was discredited. Suddenly, John R. Bolton, the conservative war hawk and favorite villain of the left, is the toast of Senate Democrats, the last best hope to prove their abuse of power case against President Trump. Democrats who once excoriated him are trumpeting his credibility as they seek his testimony in Mr. Trump's impeachment trial. On the other side of the aisle, some of Mr. Bolton's longtime Republican friends are just as abruptly tossing him to the curb. Both sides, so it's okay. Painting him as a disgruntled former advisor who just wants to sell books. Some of the same senators who allied with him, promoted his career, consulted with him on foreign affairs, and took his political action committee money, are going along as he is painted as a tool for the radical Dems in the deep state. That's actually a quote. I'm curious where that came from. It is linked. Shall we go look? Lou Dobbs. Okay, well, he's pretty stupid. I can believe he would say such a thing. There's your answer. Anyway, so blah, blah, blah. Tool for radical Dems in deep state, as he was termed on one of the Fox News channels, part of the network where he worked for 11 years. It's a totally upside-down world, said Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland, who 2 years ago denounced Mr. Bolton's history of warmongering when he was appointed Mr. Trump's national security advisor. But what we should all agree on is we want to get to the truth of the matter about the impeachment charges, and we should accept this testimony under penalty of perjury. I mean, that's pretty fair, right? Is he a great truth teller? I don't know, but that's kind of why I'm pointing out that we would be taking his testimony under penalty of perjury. I hold that out not just because anybody could be a perjurer, but in particular because he could absolutely be a perjurer. There is, in fact, no agreement on that as Senate Republicans tried to wrap up the trial without calling Mr. Bolton or any other witnesses in a vote likely to be held on Friday. Many Republicans argue that nothing has changed despite Mr. Bolton's account that Mr. Trump wanted to hold up American security aid to Ukraine until it investigated his political rivals, domestic political rivals, an assertion that directly contradicts the president. And by the way, an assertion that directly contradicts all of the president's defenders, including his defense team and all of the Republican senators and House members who have said there are no witnesses. And by the way, I never really did finish that thought. I think the thing that they were trying to do with that is essentially, play on the American public's understanding of television courtroom drama. If there are no witnesses, that's that. Yeah, according to courtroom TV drama. No witnesses, you cannot have a case. All the evidence is circumstantial, and you can't convict people on circumstantial evidence. Sure, you can. You do. People do it all the time. You just say, the reality of it is that you'd like some more solid evidence. That's not supposed to be, I guess, ultimately, you might say, well, it's supposed to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Don't forget about that. And circumstantial evidence is not always enough to get you past that threshold beyond a reasonable doubt. It can be, I guess, in certain circumstances, but often it won't be, and defense attorneys will argue that. And sometimes juries listen, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes juries don't listen and they get overturned on appeal, and sometimes they don't. Some things like that happen. But I guess they were playing on the belief that people with crime drama, television crime drama level understanding of legal proceedings would say, well, if there are no witnesses, then even if he did do it, you still can't prove it, and therefore you can't convict him of it, and so fine, whatever, I'll take that result. But of course, there are witnesses, and that screws things up a little bit. Back to this article. This is one of those moments that capture Mr. Trump's Washington, where ideology, philosophy, party, and policy mean less than where you stand on Mr. Trump, for or against him. Here, this too is even both sidesing it. Bolton is actually more conservative and more consistent than Mr. Trump, but since his story appears to threaten the president, he has been promptly embraced by one camp and exorcised by the other. Among those who understand what that feels like are other refugees from the Trump White House who, despite devoting what they described as endless hours trying to make his presidency a success, are now branded apostates for speaking out. Among them, John F. Kelly, former Secretary of Homeland Security and White House Chief of Staff. Mr. Kelly was one of the few prominent conservatives to jump to Mr. Bolton's defense since news of his account, including an unpublished book submitted to the White House for review, broke in the New York Times on Sunday. If John Bolton says that in the book, I believe John Bolton, Mr. Kelly said during a lecture in Sarasota, Florida, according to a report in the Herald Tribune. And again, here, there's this slight hint that among those who understand what it feels like, that is the upside downness and being embraced by the folks who used to excoriate you and exorcised by those who used to embrace you. That is supposed to have happened to John Kelly too, and I don't know if that's true either. Again, same dynamic, sort of a lazy reporter's dynamic of, he's saying something bad about the president, so now people who oppose the president embrace him. Well, we accept that he has something to say that needs to be evaluated, and we ought to evaluate it. And we might evaluate it with a grain of salt because we know that guy's a jerk. Has he been embraced by the other side? I don't know. I doubt it. My contention is that he is not. I'm curious whether Peter Baker has documented that well. He's linked here the words, according to a report in the Herald Tribune. That is to say, this is a report in the Herald Tribune about his lecture in Sarasota, Florida, during which he says, if John Bolton says that in the book, I believe John Bolton. Now, I'm curious. Let's click on the link and find out whether the Herald Tribune tells us who he was speaking to in Sarasota, Florida, and whether that tells us anything about whether or not he's been embraced by opponents of the president. Here's the report. I don't know. The date is, the date's yesterday, the 28th. Former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly tells Sarasota crowd, I believe John Bolton. Who is the crowd? And the answer is, here's the caption for the photo. He's wearing a ball cap, and it's not a Make America Great Again hat either. Weird. Former Trump White House Chief of Staff and U.S. Marine Corps General John Kelly speaks with members of the media before the Ringling College Town Hall audience on Monday, January 27th. Ringling College, like Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. I don't know. I'm sorry if you're working hard at Ringling College. I'm not aware of the institution, but okay. So let's see what's going on here. Asked if Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, should testify. Kelly said he supports calling witnesses, but who cares? He's not a member. President Trump's denying that he told former national security advisor John Bolton that he wanted to withhold military aid from Ukraine until the country launched investigations into Joe Biden and his son. Allegations that Bolton levies in his new book, according to New York Times report. One of Trump's former aides, though, told the Sarasota audience on Monday evening, blah, blah, we know what he was. We know who it was. We know what he said. Kelly spoke Monday at the Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall. It's an unfortunate name, but it's Wezel. It could be Van Wezel, I hope, maybe. They'd probably opt for the Van Wezel, I guess, pronunciation. Where is that? Well, that's at the Ringling College Library Association Town Hall Lecture Series. I guess the Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall must be on the campus of Ringling College. That's apparently in Sarasota. Doesn't tell me much yet. The general worked with Bolton during his time as chief of staff, which ended in early 2019. Kelly said Bolton is an honest person, but Kelly's not, so what do I care? All right, so these two dishonest jackass warmongers trust one another, and that's great. But it would mean something different for Baker's reporting if it was at the Sarasota Democratic Club, for instance. That would tell me that Democrats in the rank and file of the party are embracing Kelly. But if it was, for instance, at the Koch brothers' house in Sarasota, I don't know if they have a house in Sarasota, but I'm sure they have a house everywhere, or whatever. Or if it was the, Breitbart News Forum in Sarasota, we would be able to tell, well, this is evidence against the claim that he's been embraced by Democrats. This is, I guess, merely evidence in neither direction. A college had an open town hall style forum at which they spoke to an interesting personage who happens to have this to say about John Bolton. It doesn't tell me anything about the validity of the claim. It does nothing to bolster the validity of the claim that's at the heart of this piece that's in the headline, that it's an upside down world, that Democrats are embracing the John Kellys and John Boltons of the world. Are they? Not so far. Mr. Kelly, the article continues, did not always get along with Mr. Bolton. At one point, they had a profanity-laced shouting match, after which Mr. Kelly left the White House for the rest of the day, even though he was the chief of staff. But Mr. Kelly said Mr. Bolton, quote, always gave the president the unvarnished truth, adding, John's an honest guy. He's a man of integrity and great character. And I dropped the F-bomb on him. So we'll see what happens. So they had a profanity-laced shouting match, I guess, over their mutual respect for one another and integrity. I don't know. You can have such a thing. But why isn't that upside-down world? He used to yell profanity at him and scream at him so much that he had to leave the White House in frustration for the rest of the day. But now he says he's an honest guy and on the up and up and unvarnished truth and blah, 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 blah. That seems upside down, but okay. I mean, it's gotten reported, but it's not the headline. That it has come to this surprises no one who actually knows Mr. Bolton, an iconoclastic believer in a forceful approach to the world, warmonger. He disdains what he views as weak-kneed conventional diplomacy, international organizations that intrude on American sovereignty, and free-rider allies, which is all interesting to point out because you would think that that would land him on the side of Trump in this exchange, given that Trump's complaint about Ukraine, or his excuse for withholding aid, one of them, was, well, the European allies aren't doing enough and not pulling their weight in supporting Ukraine. So why should we give them money when the Europeans aren't? But the Europeans are. So that excuse doesn't hold water, but never mind. He's going to keep making it, and we have to keep refuting it. But you would think Bolton, who always loves the unvarnished truth, would be saying, well, no, the Europeans are doing just fine on this. But he has every indication or every reason to pretend he's with Trump on this one because he can yell about free rider allies. Anyway, when he is on someone's side, there is no more relentless ally. When he is not, there is no more implacable foe. Apparently, this really is just a piece about Peter Baker being a fan of John Bolton, I guess. Loyalty to party or president takes a back seat to principle, as he defines it. While President George W. Bush gave him high-ranking positions, including a recess appointment as ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Bolton did not hold back, criticizing his former boss after leaving the administration for going soft on North Korea and Iran. He wrote a bracingly candid memoir that named names and spared no one. Oh, so he's actually written a memoir before. And we can evaluate that, I guess, as apparently being bracingly candid. So, all right, Peter Baker testifies in favor of Bolton. Fair enough, just don't pin it on everybody else. Simply reading that would have made clear to Mr. Trump or his aides what might happen when he left this White House. And so it has. Just months after leaving Mr. Trump's White House amid tension over policy toward Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, and Ukraine, Bolton has written The Room Where It Happened, to be published in March, in which he reports that the president explicitly told him that he did not want to release $391 million in aid to Ukraine until it announced investigations into his Democratic rivals, including Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. That's an interesting way of putting it. Was he looking for dirt on other rivals besides Biden? I don't know. That seems to hold the door open to that. That account threw the Senate trial into temporary disarray since it undermined Mr. Trump's defense. The president negated his defense, really, but okay. The president denied Mr. Bolton's version of events, and his personal lawyer, Giuliani, called the former advisor a backstabber. On the Fox Business Channel, Lou Dobbs assailed Mr. Bolton as a tool of the president's enemies, citing as proof the fact that he used the same literary agents, as James Comey, the FBI director fired by Mr. Trump, prompting one of the literary agents to point out that one of their other clients was Mr. Dobbs. That's pretty funny. Well, Mr. Bolton has left plenty of bruises over the years, and he was accused of politicizing intelligence before the Iraq War, yes, an accusation he denied, which he was wrong about. Many former colleagues said he was forthcoming to a fault, except for that, career-defining thing. But he denies it, so whatever. Ambassador Bolton was known for being frank and candid. In fact, some complained that his frankness and candor got in the way of a more indirect diplomatic approach, said Peter D. Favor, F-E-A-V-E-R, a national security aide in Mr. Bush's White House. I do not recall ever hearing people complain that he made stuff up, or made up stuff is the way he said it. Democrats at this point are happy to vouch for his honesty. I think Bolton has a lot of credibility. Senator Thomas R. Carper of Delaware, who once called him too extreme, said on Fox News this week, not just among Republicans, but our side as well. All right, so that's as close as it comes. That is an attributed quote so far. Tom Carper saying, I think he has a lot of credibility on our side. But again, star witness, I don't know. No. I'm not, and here I think the words are actually important. for reasons previously explained. Of course, even that's not necessarily internally contradictory. I think Bolton has a lot of credibility, but you've called him too extreme in the past. Yes, and here's why I think he has lots of credibility. What we're talking about here is an example of the president being too extreme in his actions. I think Bolton has a lot of credibility to speak to how Republicans frequently are too extreme about things. I've explained it. That's fine by me. On the other hand, Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, said Mr. Bolton was not to be believed. I would say that he's a witness very interested in making a lot of money right now, Mr. Paul said on CNN. A month ago, he was against testifying. Now that his book is complete and available for $29.95, I don't know if that's the real price point, but good point there, he's all for testifying. So I think we need to take with a grain of salt his testimony if he comes in. And that's the real answer. You're not supposed to vote not to hear from witnesses. You're supposed to hear from all witnesses and evaluate their veracity one at a time, individually. And it's perfectly reasonable to say, I heard what he had to say. I don't believe him for reasons or no reasons. Though you're supposed to have reasons. Because logic. More painful for Mr. Bolton may be closer friends who have distanced themselves. Senator James Inhofe, Republican of Oklahoma, called Mr. Bolton one of my closest friends a few weeks ago, suggested that his close friend had a grudge. He was fired by the president, Inhofe told reporters, although Bolton insists he resigned, and that can have an effect on a person. True enough. Fred Fleitz, another longtime friend who served as Mr. Bolton's chief of staff twice, most recently in the Trump White House, even wrote an op-ed article for Fox News criticizing his former boss for publishing a book about the president before the election. Presidents have to be able to consult and confide in their national security advisor without worrying about those discussions being published, Fleitz said in an interview on Tuesday. He added that Mr. Bolton is a straight shooter. He's an honest man, and he's an honorable man. Which, if he's right about that, of course, would mean, I got to tell the truth about this, even though presidents are entitled to candid advice from people in confidence, so long as it doesn't, let's say, break the Impoundment Control Act, among other things. Mr. Bolton has often been misunderstood or mischaracterized, like as a star witness, for instance. His critics call him a neoconservative, but in fact he cares little for the democracy promotion that drives actual neoconservatives. Instead, he's a hardcore Americanist, as he puts it, favoring tough policies up to and including the use of force to defend American interests. He supported the invasion of Iraq, he has said, not to create a Jeffersonian republic in Baghdad, but to eliminate what he saw as a security threat to the United States. Okay, I acknowledge that he is that. He has consistently advocated regime change or military action to resolve conflicts with states like Iran and North Korea, and spent much of his tenure as national security advisor trying to keep Mr. Trump from entering what Mr. Bolton considered unwise agreements with enemies. He struggled over whether to testify in the impeachment hearings, even as he wrote his latest book. He finally offered to appear in the Senate if the Senate subpoenaed him, knowing that he would be harshly criticized if he refused to testify, and his account of the Ukraine matter only became public in the book after the trial. What? I don't even understand what I just read. He finally offered to appear in the Senate, yes, if they subpoenaed him, knowing that he would be harshly criticized if he refused to testify, and his account of the Ukraine matter only became public in the book after the trial. No, it's in the middle of the trial. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. But while colleagues said he was disturbed by the president's actions in Ukraine, he has openly criticized the president's Iran and North Korea policies since leaving the White House. That does not mean that Mr. Bolton has joined the ranks of the never-Trump Republicans. I guess we can actually finish this here before we close things out. Friends say he still wants a future in Republican politics, having reconstituted his political action committee shortly after leaving the White House. But they say he understands that donors would be reluctant to contribute if he was perceived as an accuser of Mr. Trump. He also remains as contemptuous of Democrats as ever and has not explicitly expressed support for impeachment or conviction. I think the Democrats should be careful in what they wish for if they do get him as a witness, Mr. Flight said. That's definitely true. I don't know that he would say what they hope he would say. And that's true too, but it is also just, again, a Republican insisting, not using the word star witness here, but insisting that it's Democrats who absolutely think it's necessary and that, it would make or break the trial if he does testify. I don't know that that's the case, and neither does anybody else. I am curious to see what the reaction was to that objection, and I'm sure they'll think I'm being pedantic, but I would like to get out. I'll get out later and explain on Twitter that, the words really do matter here, because it's Republicans who keep saying star witness, star witness, star witness, and now you're writing star witness, and that's a bad thing, even for a both sides reporter to do. I don't know that Democrats have succeeded in planting a phrase that can turn perception of things so successfully with Peter Baker, but maybe they haven't, and it's our turn, and now we're due, so we should think about what phrase we want to plant in his head. All right, time for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and for us to go check in with C-SPAN and see what's going to happen today and how long they'll be able to keep up the charade of the question and answer period. But let me tell you what's coming up on Justice's program next. We got a little time for it. Let's see. We got, starting off in the Bistro Cafe, it won't be long for John Kelly's time in the barrel after he sided with Bolton, so let's wait on that. On the rest of the menu, the Government Services Agency has no idea how much money foreign governments spent at Trump
From
International
Daily Co's
Hotel.
Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
That's right, the GSA, which was, the star witness for Democrats, I'm sure, when they reported about the breaking of the Impoundment Control Act, has no idea how much other governments have paid at the Trump Hotel and has not bothered to find out. But you know what? They've been wrong on this one since the very beginning days of this administration. You'll all remember that. Stay tuned.